The last memorial beacon had been drifting for 197 years. It was a small thing, barely the size of a cargo pod, painted in the dull gray of the Concord Coalition's morning color. It had been placed at the edge of the veil by 11 species who had agreed on very little, but had agreed on this. Nothing comes back from in there. Fleet Admiral Ruvek was not a sentimental man. He had taken the memorial rotation assignment without complaint, brought 3 warships and a science vessel, and settled in for 30 days of quiet. His crew ran drills. His cooks made decent food. The veil sat at the edge of sensor range like a bruise in space, deep and slow and impossible to look at directly. On the 19th day, one of the junior sensor operators said something that nobody on any coalition ship had said in 2 centuries. "Admiral, I have a contact." Inside the veil, moving outward. Ruvek did not move from his chair. He had been reading a report on grain trade disputes. He set it down very slowly. "Debris," he said. "No, sir. It is moving with purpose. Speed is low. Heading is direct and stable. It is not tumbling." Ruvek walked to the sensor station himself. He looked at the readout. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "Battle stations. All ships." The 3 warships came alive. Weapon ports opened. Shields came up. The science vessel, whose captain had never once in her career had reason to fear anything, found herself shouting at her crew to begin emergency recordings and not to stop for any reason. The contact grew on the screen. It was slow. It was steady. And then the signal analysts began pulling at their consoles because something strange was coming in alongside the mass reading. A broadcast. Old encoding. A frequency the Coalition archives listed as belonging to a species the records called human, a species that had sent a small fleet into the Veil 104 years ago and never come back. "It is broadcasting an identification signal," the analyst said. "The language is, the files say it is human emergency identification. The code matches their naval registry format. Coalition records show only 1 human ship entered the Veil. It was called ISV Pale Verdict." Ruvek stared at the screen. "That was over 100 years ago," said Commander Soth beside him. "Yes," Ruvek said. "It was." The shape resolved slowly as it cleared the Veil's boundary. It was not what anyone expected. It was not a wreck. It was not a ghost ship drifting without power. ISV Pale Verdict moved with quiet, deliberate control. Its running lights were on. Its hull was marked and patched in places, but it was whole. It was one ship. One single human warship, coming out of a place where 14 alien fleets had gone and vanished. Ruvek held the engagement order in his hand for 11 seconds. He did not give it. Instead, he opened a hailing channel. "Unknown vessel. You are broadcasting on a human naval frequency. Identify yourself and state your condition. You are surrounded by Concord Coalition warships. Do not make any aggressive action." There was a pause. A long one. Long enough that Soth leaned toward him and murmured, "Admiral, we should." Then a voice came back. It was calm. It was human. It spoke in Coalition standard with an accent that matched no living dialect in the Coalition's records, but was perfectly understandable. "This is Captain Aldrich Voss of ISV Pale Verdict, Human Naval Registry. Our condition is stable. We are not in distress. We are not hostile. We are aware we have been absent for some time, and we are prepared to submit to any inspection or debrief your command requires. We request permission to dock at your nearest vessel." Ruvek looked at Soth. Soth had no expression because he was too busy being afraid to make one. On the science vessel, the captain had gone very still. She pulled up the species file on humans. She read the entry. It was short. It said that humanity had been a promising, if unusual, species, that they had contacted the Coalition approximately 120 years ago, that they had declined most formal treaty structures, and that the last recorded contact was a human fleet of 3 vessels entering the Veil in what appeared to be a deliberate exploratory mission. Status: lost. Last contact: 104 years prior. She closed the file. She looked at her screen. ISV Pale Verdict was sitting in space with its running lights blinking in a slow, patient rhythm, waiting for an answer the same way something waits when it has already decided it will wait as long as necessary. She opened her recorder. "This is Science Vessel Convar, Captain Desh Ilyuan recording. The date is the 19th day of the memorial rotation. An unknown human warship has exited the Veil. It appears intact. It appears crude. It has identified itself as ISV Pale Verdict. She paused. I want it noted that I have been a scientist for 31 years, and I do not know what I am looking at. On ISV Pale Verdict, in a small side cabin, Dr. Sion Roth made her own recording. Day 847 since entry into the Veil. We are out. We are intact. All 12 crew accounted for. We have made contact with a coalition blockade fleet. Aldrich looks tired. We are all tired. But we are out. A pause. Begin mission log, Phase 2. Contact established. Proceed. Nobody in the coalition had a protocol for this. There were protocols for first contact. There were protocols for hostile contact, for derelict contact, for signals from deep space and from dying ships, and from species that had been declared extinct. There was no protocol filed anywhere in the coalition's combined military and diplomatic archive for a ship that came back from a place where nothing came back from. Ruvek made a decision the way he made most decisions, quietly, and with the knowledge that he would have to explain it later. He allowed the docking. ISV Pale Verdict chose its own airlock. That was the first thing that unnerved the crew of Ruvek's flagship. They had transmitted docking coordinates. The human ship acknowledged the coordinates, paused for exactly 4 seconds, and then moved to a different airlock on the far side of the docking ring. When Ruvek's communications officer asked why, the calm voice of Captain Voss replied, "Better angle for our sensors to monitor the Veil's boundary while we are stationary. We prefer not to lose visibility on the exit point." Soth said this was suspicious. Ruvek thought it sounded like a crew that had spent a very long time being careful and had not yet found a reason to stop. The boarding team that entered Pale Verdict was 12 coalition soldiers and 2 analysts. They were ready for anything. They had been briefed on every scenario the combined tactical minds of 3 warships could produce in 40 minutes. They were not ready for what they found. The ship was clean. Not just functional, clean. Organized in ways that spoke of long discipline. Every surface had a purpose and was being used for that purpose. The crew of 12 humans they met were calm. Not the calm of people pretending. The calm of people who had been in difficult situations for so long that calm had become the only setting they had left. The analyst, a woman named Prin who specialized in unknown technology, began scanning the hull interior and immediately got error readings on her instruments. She recalibrated. She got more errors. She tried a 3rd time. The readings were not errors. The alloy composite of Pale Verdict's inner hull was simply something her instruments had no category for. She pulled a senior engineer aside and said, very quietly, "What did you make this out of?" The engineer, a large man named Bram Okafor who was drinking something hot from a sealed container, looked at her and said, "Mostly what we brought with us, plus what we found in there. We had a lot of time." He took another drink. "Do you want the full materials list?" Sion wrote it all down. She writes everything down. Prince sent a message back to Ruvek that said only, "Their hull composition is unknown to our instruments. I do not believe this is a threat. I believe they have been doing materials science in an anomalous physics environment for 2 years, and the results do not match our baseline. Request full technical debrief be added to the agenda." The debrief itself was conducted in Pale Verdict's small meeting room, which had a table that was bolted to the floor at an unusual angle, a detail nobody asked about, but everyone noticed. Captain Voss sat across from Ruvek and Soth and answered questions with a directness that left no room for evasion and also somehow no room for drama. How many crew entered the Veil? 12. How many are present now? 12. Were there casualties? 3 serious injuries in the first 6 months. All recovered. How long were you inside? 847 days by ship calendar, which matches approximately 2 years and 4 months of external time. Do you have documentation? Approximately 9,000 pages of it. Soth leaned forward. How many ships are still inside? From the other fleets? Voss looked at him. None that we found still operational. We found debris fields. We found some intact hull sections. We recovered what data we could from them. He paused. They went in and hit the interior geometry wrong. It is not forgiving if you panic. And you did not panic, Soth said, and the way he said it was not a compliment. We had arguments, Voss said calmly. Some of them were very loud. But no, we did not panic. We mapped instead. Ambassador Lyrit had not been inside the meeting room. She was watching through the observation feed from Ruvek's bridge, sitting very still. She was the representative of the Villani, the species that had placed the warning beacons at the Vale's edge. Her people had lost 2 ships in their 60 years before humanity entered. She had composed the official coalition statement of mourning when the human fleet was declared lost. She watched Voss speak. She watched the calm on his face and the calm on the faces of his crew visible through the corridor feeds. She watched Bram Okafor return to the engine section and begin running diagnostics with the comfortable ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. She called up the record she had written. The human fleet entered the Vale knowing the risk. They were warned. They chose to proceed. They are lost, and we mourn their bravery. She closed it. She opened a new document and did not yet know what to write in it. Outside, in the corridor of Pale Verdict, Dr. Sion Roth passed a coalition soldier and nodded at him pleasantly. The soldier had been trained to be ready for threats. He was not ready for a small woman with ink on her fingers and a recorder around her neck who smiled at him like they were passing in a library. He stepped aside. She walked past. She was already talking quietly into her recorder before she reached the next corner. The coalition did something it had never done before. It sent its most senior xenobiologist aboard a human vessel to conduct a live crew assessment. His name was Ferran, and he had spent his career studying species from a comfortable distance. He was deeply uncomfortable now. He sat across from each human crew member for 30 minutes, one at a time, with a list of questions designed to assess psychological stability, memory reliability, and whether they were who they said they were. It was the coalition's polite way of asking if they had been replaced by something. The first crew member he interviewed was Lieutenant Dara Osei. She sat down, looked at his list of questions, and said, "Is question 7 asking if I feel like myself?" Ferran blinked. "It is assessing your continuity of personal identity." "Right. Yes. I feel like myself. I feel like a version of myself who has not had fresh food in 800 days and has strong opinions about gravitational cartography, but still essentially myself." She tilted her head. "Do you want me to walk you through my psychological state from month 3, when things were very bad, through month 7, when Bram fixed the water recycler and morale returned to acceptable levels? I can be specific." Ferran had not expected specificity. He said yes. She was specific. He spent 2 hours with her instead of 30 minutes, and left with 12 pages of notes, and a strong feeling that these people were not constructed imitations of anything. They were simply people who had been through something long and difficult, and had come out the other side with very clear memories of all of it. Ferran reported to Ruvek. All 12 crew members are consistent with 2-year-long duration deep space exposure under high stress. No signs of external influence. They are what they say they are. Commander Soth read this report and filed a dissent. His dissent said, "Their calm is not natural. No crew of 12 could survive 847 days inside an anomalous space region without documented psychological breakdown. The absence of breakdown is itself suspicious." Dr. Roth somehow got a copy of this dissent. She came to the debrief session the following morning with a stack of data files, set them in front of Soth, and said, without any particular heat, "We had breakdowns. Month 3, Month 5, Month 9, and Month 14. All documented. Crew member reports, personal logs, medical assessments, resolution protocols, and outcome records. You did not ask for breakdown documentation. You should have asked. We would have given it to you." Soth stared at the files. He did not thank her. The question everyone wanted answered and nobody had directly asked yet was what was actually inside the veil. Ruvek finally put it directly to Voss that evening, sitting in the meeting room that smelled faintly of engine oil and whatever the humans used for coffee. Voss thought for a moment before answering, and it was a real moment of thought, not stalling. "The geometry inside is wrong," he said. "Not impossible. Wrong. Like someone built space by following most of the rules and then stopped caring near the end. Light moves at angles you do not expect. Gravity pulls in directions that do not match the mass distribution. The first 6 months, our navigation systems were useless because they assumed physics worked the way they work out here. We had to rebuild our navigational model from scratch using direct observation. For 6 months you were lost. For 6 months we were confused," Voss said. "There is a difference. Lost means you have stopped trying to understand where you are. We never stopped. It just took time to build new tools." Ruvek looked at him for a long moment. He had commanded fleets for 30 years. He had met brave people and stupid people, and people who were both. He was having difficulty deciding which category this man fit into, and was slowly arriving at the conclusion that neither category applied. The other fleets, Ruvek said. You said they hit the interior geometry wrong. Yes. They went in expecting normal space and treated the anomalies as malfunctions. They overcorrected. At the velocities they were traveling, overcorrection in that kind of field, Voss paused. They did not suffer long. The debris fields were not large. The room was quiet. Ruvek said, You were inside for nearly 2.5 years. At what point did your crew consider turning back? Month 4, Voss said immediately. We voted. 7-5 in favor of continuing. Month 8 we voted again. 9-3 in favor of continuing. After that we stopped voting because the answer was always going to be the same. He looked at his hands. We had come too far to come back with nothing. And we were starting to understand the place. Turning back from something you are starting to understand is its own kind of failure. Ruvek sent his nightly report to Coalition Command that evening. He wrote, The humans are cooperative, transparent, and in full command of their faculties. Their data is real. Their survival is documented. I have no explanation for how 12 people maintained cohesion under these conditions. I am not sure the explanation matters. What matters is that they did. He stared at that last line for a while. Then he sent it. On the 4th day, Dr. Sion Roth asked for access to the Coalition's historical archive on the Veil. This was an unusual request. Most crews that had just survived a 2-year ordeal in an anomalous space region asked for food, communication access to their families, and sleep. Roth had done the first 2 briefly and the 3rd in short intervals, and had otherwise spent every waking hour cross-referencing Pale Verdict's internal mission logs with the data the Coalition transmitted over. Ruvek gave her the access. He gave it partly because refusing seemed petty and partly because he wanted to see what she was looking for. She found it in 11 hours. The formal presentation she requested was small. Ruvek, Soth, Farhan, Ambassador Lyrit who had come aboard without quite announcing why, and the captain of the science vessel Convar, Desh Ilyuan, who had sent a request saying simply that she would like to be present for anything scientific in nature. Roth stood at the front of the room without visual aids or theatrical build-up. She had a data pad. She talked. Every fleet that entered the Veil over the past 2 centuries entered at high tactical velocity, she said. This is standard Coalition military doctrine for entering unknown space. You go fast so you can maneuver quickly. The first anomaly they encountered in every case was a lateral gravity shear. We have it in the debris field data. You can see the stress fractures on the hull pieces we recovered. The fractures are consistent with a ship trying to execute a fast turn inside a gravity field that did not behave the way its navigation system calculated. She brought up a diagram on the room's screen. Hull fragments. Stress fracture analysis. Trajectory modeling. They turned the wrong way, she said. Not because their commanders were bad. Because the field did not match any field their systems had a model for. At high velocity, the wrong turn in that kind of gradient is not survivable. Lyrit said, very quietly, all 14 fleets. All 14, yes. Same entry velocity range. Same type of initial anomaly encounter. Same failure mode. Roth looked up. Our ship entered at 1/4 standard approach speed because our mission was exploratory, not tactical. We hit the same anomaly. We had time to feel it before we had to respond to it. That is the only reason we are here. Desh Ilyuan, the science captain, said, You survived by accident of mission type. Partly. After the first anomaly, we knew the space inside did not match standard models. So we slowed down further and began building a new model before we moved. Every time we encountered something that did not make sense, we stopped and studied it until it made sense before we went further. Roth put her datapad down. 847 days. Most of that time was spent not moving. Mapping, testing, revising the model, moving 30 minutes, stopping again. Soth made a sound. It was not quite contempt and not quite confusion. That is not a military approach. No, Roth agreed. It is a scientific one. Then Ruvek said the thing everyone in the room was already thinking. You have navigational charts. Yes. Charts that would allow a ship to transit the Veil safely. With a crew trained on the interior physics model, yes. It would still not be easy, but it would not be lethal. The room was very still. Ruvek said, "What do you want for them?" Roth blinked. It was the first moment in the presentation where she looked genuinely surprised. "Want for them?" "The charts. What does your government want in exchange for the navigational data?" Roth looked back at the door for a moment, as if confirming that Voss was not behind it. Then she looked back at Ruvek. "Nothing," she said. "We are going to give them to you. That is why I asked for this presentation. We were going to submit the data package to your science vessel's archive this afternoon." Soth stood up. "That is not how this works." "How what works?" "Leverage. Strategic data. You have information that 14 fleets died acquiring. You could negotiate from a position of." "We did not acquire this data by dying," Roth said, and for the first time there was something in her voice that was not quite polite. "We acquired it by living. And we are giving it to you because the next species that goes into the veil without it will not come back, and we would prefer they come back." She looked at Soth steadily. "We do not need leverage from you. We need you to stop having funerals for ships that went in ignorant when we can fix the ignorant part." Desh Ilyuin made a note. She wrote, "The human position on data sharing is not tactical. It is moral. I do not have a framework for this in a military context. Recommend Xenosociology review the mission transcript." Ambassador Lyrit said nothing. She was watching Roth the way someone watches a thing that has just rearranged their understanding of something important. Her people had placed morning beacons. Humanity had brought back a map. After the room cleared, Lyrit stayed. Roth was packing up her data pad. "My people warned yours not to go in," Lyrit said. "I know," Roth said. "I read the beacon transcripts. We cared. We had lost ships there. We did not want your species to lose ships there." "I understand that," Roth said. She did not say it unkindly. "We assumed you were gone." Roth picked up her pad. She thought for a moment. "We were gone," she said. "We just did not stay that way." She left. Lyrit stood in the empty room with the diagram of hull stress fractures still on the screen and began drafting a message home that she did not yet know how to finish. The data transfer was scheduled for the following morning. Roth had packaged 9,000 pages of mission documentation, 412 navigational reference points, the full interior physics model that Pale Verdict's crew had built over 22 months, and a separate file that contained personal crew logs that she labeled optional reading, included for completeness. She submitted it to the science vessel Convar's archive at what she expected would be a quiet and administrative moment. It did not go that way. At 0340 station time, while most of Pale Verdict's crew slept and most of the coalition boarding team slept, and even Ruvek slept, Commander Soth convened a private communication with 3 captains from the other warships in the blockade fleet. The communication was encrypted. It was also not encrypted well enough, because Pale Verdict's communication system had been rebuilt from scratch inside an anomalous physics environment by people with nothing else to do, and it was considerably more sensitive than anything the coalition captains had accounted for. Lieutenant Dara Osei was not asleep. She was running routine sensor sweeps out of habit, the same habit she had maintained for every night watch for 2.5 years, because inside the veil you never stopped watching. She picked up Soth's encrypted channel. She did not interrupt it. She listened to it. Then she went and woke up Captain Voss. Soth's plan was not complex. He would request a security hold on the data transfer, detain the human crew, and have the data physically extracted from Pale Verdict's systems by the technical team that had been aboard all week and had, he believed, identified the archive access points. He genuinely believed he was protecting the coalition. He was wrong about the archive access points. Osei listened to the full communication, which ran to 40 minutes. Then she went to the ship's broadcast console and made a small adjustment that Bram Okafor had designed on day 600 of the mission, a full-spectrum data broadcast protocol that would transmit simultaneously to every ship within coalition contact range without needing to route through any relay. She brought up the navigational data package. She set the broadcast target. She looked at Voss, who was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. He nodded. She sent it. At 0411, every coalition ship in the blockade fleet, including Ruvek's flagship, Soth's ship, and the science vessel Convar, received the complete navigational data package for the Veil's interior. It arrived at all of them at the same moment. It was not a transfer request. It was not a submission requiring authorization. It simply arrived, the same way a signal arrives, and it was already unpacked and indexed before any communications officer on any ship had time to question it. Ruvek woke up to an alert that was unlike any alert he had ever received. It told him his archive now contained 9,000 pages of mission documentation from an unknown human vessel that had, apparently, decided not to wait for the scheduled morning transfer. Sot's morning was considerably worse. By 0600, Ruvek had put together what had happened. He called Soth to his office, sent everyone else out, and had a short conversation that was not recorded and did not need to be. Soth was relieved of command before breakfast. The reason given in the official record was conduct inconsistent with coalition diplomatic protocol. It was accurate, if incomplete. At 0900, Ruvek boarded Pale Verdict for the first time personally. He found Captain Voss eating something out of a sealed packet and reviewing the morning sensor data on a secondary screen. The energy between them was not hostile. It was also not warm. It was the energy of two people who understand each other without liking the understanding particularly. Ruvek sat down across from him. "You monitored our encrypted channels," he said. "You boarded our ship and spent 4 days assessing whether we were real," Voss replied. "We were careful. We have been careful for a long time." Ruvek accepted this. The broadcast was preemptive. "Yes, we were going to give it to you this morning anyway. We simply made sure there was no version of last night where it did not happen." Ruvek looked at him for a moment. "You do not trust us." "We trust you as much as it is reasonable to trust a fleet that had weapons locked on us for the first 2 hours," Voss said. "Which is not nothing. You held the engagement order. That matters." He set down his food packet. "We are not naive, Admiral. We spent 2 years inside something that would have killed us if we stopped paying attention for even a few days. We stopped being naive in there. It would have been an expensive habit." Ruvek looked at the hull around him. The patched sections. The modified systems. The engineering marks that did not match any coalition standard. "My analyst says your hull alloy is not in any database she has access to." "No, Bram made it. Your engineer." He got bored. A pause. He gets creative when he gets bored. It was month 11. The alloy is documented in the technical files. Your scientist can have the formula. Ruvek returned to his ship and wrote a report to Coalition Command. He wrote that humanity was not what the records described. The records described a species that had been lost. What he had found instead was a species that had been somewhere difficult for a long time and had come back more capable than anyone had planned for. He sent it. Then he looked out at Pale Verdict docked at the airlock it had chosen for itself, running lights blinking in that slow, patient rhythm. He decided, practically, that this was going to change a great many things. Pale Verdict had been docked for 9 days when the first formal diplomatic signal arrived. It did not come from Ruvek's fleet. It came directly to Pale Verdict's communication array, routed through the Coalition's deep space relay, and it bore the seal of the Daven Collective, one of the 11 species in the Coalition and, notably, the species that had sent the largest fleet into the Veil 40 years ago. 43 ships. None returned. The signal was addressed to Captain Aldrich Voss personally. It said, "We have received the navigational data. We have begun review. We have no words for what we owe you. We would welcome contact at your earliest convenience." Voss read it twice. He set it on the table and thought about 43 ships. The second signal came 2 hours later from the Mireth Assembly. They had lost 2 fleets. The signal was formal and short and asked whether humanity would be willing to participate in a joint scientific review of the navigational data. The third signal came from a species nobody on Pale Verdict had records for, because they had only joined the Coalition 14 years ago. Their signal was the longest. It said that they had been planning to send an exploratory mission into the Veil the following year. They had been building the ships for 3 years. They were stopping that construction. They wanted to know if a human crew would be willing to help them train pilots on the interior physics model instead. Lieutenant Osei read this one aloud to the crew at dinner, flat-voiced, until the last line. "We did not know you were still out there, but we are very glad that you are." She put the reader down. She said, "Right," and went quiet in a way that was not her normal manner. Nobody commented. That was understood. Ambassador Lyric came to Pale Verdict on the 7th day with a data chip and a stiffness in her manner that was not hostility, but was the closest thing to vulnerability her species showed in public. She asked to speak with Voss alone, and Voss agreed. In the meeting room, Lyric set the data chip on the table. This is my people's original Veil survey. 60 years old. Incomplete, because we lost ships still inside when we decided to stop. You gave us your data. I want you to have ours. Voss looked at the chip. They agreed to release it? Lyrit was quiet for a moment. They will, she said, which was not quite the same thing, and they both knew it. Voss picked up the chip. He turned it over once. He said, your beacons. The ones at the edge of the veil. They were placed because your people cared. Yes. We saw them when we came out. The signals were still running. He looked at her. Thank you for that. Even when we did not come back the first time you expected us to, you kept them running. Lyrit had nothing to say to this. She nodded once, which for her species was more than it appeared. The departure was on the 9th morning. Ruvek came to the docking bay himself, which was not required, and which his second-in-command noted was unprecedented. The new second-in-command, a quiet captain named Dare who had replaced Soth without any particular drama, stood 2 steps behind him and watched. Bram Okafor was the last one back aboard. He had spent the final 2 days with the Coalition engineers, talking through the alloy formula and hull modifications. By the end, they were arguing about thermal dispersal coefficients in the way engineers argue, which is energetically and without real animosity. He shook hands with all of them. They had not expected handshakes and had to look up the gesture. The handshakes were slightly too firm. Okafor did not comment. Ruvek extended his arm, the Coalition's formal gesture of acknowledged debt. Voss matched it without hesitation. Nobody had told him what it meant. He had apparently looked it up. Pale Verdict undocked without ceremony. It moved away from the fleet at the same calm pace it had arrived at, running lights blinking. Dare, watching it go, said to Ruvek, where do you think they have been for 100 years? Before the mission, I mean. The records show almost no contact after first interaction. Ruvek watched Pale Verdict until it was a point of light. The records show almost no contact with us, he said. That is not the same thing. Inside Pale Verdict, Roth recorded the final mission log. She sat in the small cabin that had been her home for nearly 3 years and spoke quietly into the recorder with the habit of someone who had not missed a single entry since day one. ISV Pale Verdict. Mission elapsed time 1,091 days. We are in transit to human space. 12 crew present, all in good condition. The Coalition has our navigational data. 3 governments have made formal contact. A 4th species has canceled a mission that would have ended badly. The Villani gave us 60 years of Veil survey data that we did not ask for. She paused. We wanted to find out what happened to the other fleets. We found out. We came back. That is the complete version of the mission objective. Another pause. Bram is already working on something. He says the alloy behaves differently in normal physics, and he wants to test the variance. Dara is sleeping. Aldrich is watching the stars. She looked at the recorder. We went where nothing came back from. We came back. I do not know if that means something large about humanity or something small about us specifically. Either way, she stopped the recording. Outside the porthole, normal space moved past in its ordinary way, ordinary stars doing ordinary things, and it was the most beautiful thing any of them had seen in a very long time.